The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel. I'm the host for this podcast. My husband, Steve Siegel, is the producer for this podcast. Today's episode is episode number 254. We are almost to the end of our fifth year of podcasting on a weekly basis, and we sincerely hope that we have been able to offer you some hope about this horrific pandemic we call drug and alcohol addiction, and also to make sure that we've let you know that there is help available no matter who you are, whether you're an addict, whether you're a loved one of an addict, whether you just want to know what's going on. We hope that we have done that for you. Just a reminder to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and also please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, if you'd like to get our weekly reminders about the podcast and other important things that come up in the recordings, in the ongoing workings of this podcast, then go to our website and sign up for our email list. We don't sell our list. We're not going to spam you. Typically, I don't send out more than one email a week, and sometimes I forget. Then you might get 2 a week, but there you go. So if you've been listening recently, you know that we have been talking a lot about Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers. And the reason for that is we had a gentleman on, and he mentioned that there was a miniseries coming up on Hulu, which is called Dopesick. And I don't know if you can still watch it on Hulu or not. I haven't looked recently. You could check it out. But it's based on a book by the same name, Dopesick, by Beth Macy. And it basically follows a couple of U.S. attorneys who kind of started looking at the crimes that were going on and the fact that the crimes were involving opioids and specifically OxyContin. And then they started delving into Purdue Pharma and marketing. And anyway, that's what the series is about. It is a docudrama, I guess you say, because it's got actors in it. But one of the key players in this whole scenario is the U.S. Attorney, Rick Mountcastle. And we're going to be talking to him today. Rick served as a federal prosecutor for more than 32 years, first at the Department of Justice and later at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Virginia. As a senior trial attorney in DOJ's criminal tax enforcement section, he prosecuted criminal tax cases throughout the U.S. In 1993, Rick was awarded DOJ's highest honor, the Attorney General's Award for the Trial of Litigation, for his work as the lead prosecutor in the trial and conviction of a Russian organized crime leader and his associates for a multi-million-dollar motor fuel excise tax scheme. While at the U.S. Attorney's Office from 1995 to 2018, Rick served in numerous roles, including as a Criminal Division Assistant U.S. Attorney, a Civil Division Assistant U.S. Attorney, the Chief of the Civil Division, the First Assistant U.S. Attorney, the Principal Deputy U.S. Attorney, and the Interim U.S. Attorney. He was the lead prosecutor on several high-profile healthcare fraud cases, including the first Purdue Pharma prosecution, the criminal and civil false claims prosecution of Abbott Labs for the fraudulent marketing of the anti-epileptic Depakote, and the Universal Health Services, Inc. False Claims Act litigation. Rick previously served 4 years as an active duty Army JAG officer and 24 years as a National Guard and Army Reserve JAG officer. So I'm super excited to talk to Rick Mountcastle and get more of the inside skinny on what it was like going after Purdue and the Sacklers. So let's talk to Rick Mountcastle. Rick Mountcastle, thank you so much for being willing to talk to us today on the podcast. I am super excited to talk to you.
Joni, thank you for inviting me, and it's an honor to be on this podcast talking to an audience of folks who I regard as heroes, folks that are battling addiction, and especially family members who are working with their loved ones to get through an addiction. It's an honor for me to be here.
Thank you so much.
So I wanted to just, I need to make this legal statement. So this is the legal fine print to my appearance on the podcast. My statements and comments during this podcast are my personal views and opinions and are in no way related to my position with the Virginia Attorney General's office.
Rick, tell us a little bit about your background, just, where you grew up. Even I know you were never a drug addict, but did you ever encounter anything just about drug addiction, just in your years growing up?
I grew up, of course, I'm kind of an older generation, so I grew up, as a baby boomer, in a military environment. My dad was in the Air Force, and then later he worked for the Department of the Army. So as I was growing up, we traveled all over the place, moved very frequently. My 5 years before of middle school and high school, before I went to college, were spent in Europe, in Italy and Germany, on basically military bases at in the military, the Department of Defense school system. So, as I recall back then, it was the 60s and the 70s, and marijuana and LSD and all that started coming to vogue. But alcoholism was really a very prevalent issue, particularly on military bases. But I didn't have, I didn't have any real experience in terms of addiction. I've been around people who, at the time drank a lot of alcohol, and in college, did you do the things that other college students do. And, looking back, you see sort of the signs of, oh, yeah, so-and-so stopped drinking, and, they decided they had a problem. But it was not something that was in your face, really. So, travel all over the place in a strict military kind of environment.
And I can relate, because I grew up the same way. My dad was in the Air Force.
Went to college in Wisconsin, and yeah. And then when I graduated from college, I had a 4-year obligation to the military because I had an ROTC scholarship. I deferred that to go to law school in D.C. at George Washington University. And after that, I went into the military as a JAG officer for 4 years. And I was stationed out near Chicago. So that's kind of the early years. I didn't really notice or start
froze
as a
up
prosecutor.
There. Rick, you froze up a little bit. So
okay.
You did mention you thought you might have some Wi-Fi issues. It looks like you may a little bit, but anyway, yeah. You were just saying, I'm not sure where you were going. You were saying you didn't really have. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about my early years. I guess I got us through law school, mm-hmm. and I went in the Army. Mm-hmm. Spent 4 years on active duty as a JAG officer in the Army. Got out, went to work for a government agency in D.C. at the Department of Transportation for a couple of years, and got interested in doing prosecution work on a detail to the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. And decided I wanted to be a prosecutor. Got a job in the Department of Justice in the tax division, so doing criminal tax cases. So the two areas that I had told myself as I was going through law school that I would never practice in were criminal law and tax law.
Never so say never.
6 years out of law school, exactly. God has a way of kind of putting you in your place when you do that. So 6 years out of law school, I was doing criminal tax work, and I did that for several years, and then ended up in Abingdon at the U.S. Attorney's Office around 1995. One of the things I noticed when I was prosecuting cases in Abingdon, particularly the normal kind of cases, not the Purdue Pharma kind of cases, but the unlawful possession of guns and drugs and other property crimes, was that a large majority of the defendants, they would, when they came through the court system, it would come to light that they either had either a drug problem or an alcohol problem. And that kind of struck me, that kind of hit me as, wow, that is really an issue, because people who are addicted to either drugs or alcohol, they're the ones that are coming through and being prosecuted criminally. They're involved in other crimes, probably related to that addiction. So that would be kind of my first thoughts about addiction.
Right. I'm going to ask you something that I possibly should have researched before I spoke to you, but I'm in where I live, we have what's called city judges, and then we have county judges, and the county or circuit court judges, and the circuit court judges are the ones that do the crime. How does that compare to what a U.S. attorney does? When does it become a U.S. attorney issue?
Yeah, so the U.S. attorney represents the government in federal court. So you have state crimes or local crimes, and you have federal crimes. And so the federal crimes are normally investigated by a federal law enforcement agency like the FBI or the DEA or the ATF.
And is that when the crime like crosses state lines? Like all of a sudden
Yes.
It's not just a Virginia problem or a Maryland problem, it's now a U.S. problem?
Yeah, so normally, yes, it's
Okay.
a case that's not just a purely some local individual violated a law, state law. It could even be a violation of federal law, but there's normally has to be a federal connection, and the federal connection is normally crossing state lines. Now, all drugs and all guns can be prosecuted as both, because those inherently, they cross state lines. Drugs, they come in through, they aren't homegrown generally. They cross state lines, and guns are usually manufactured out of state. So those can be prosecuted as both. And so then it's a decision as to what's in the best interest of the people. Should it be federal or state?
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're probably pretty close to the part of your story that leads into you and your partner beginning to investigate Purdue Pharma. Tell us how that happened.
So in far southwest Virginia, not as to be distinguished from southern West Virginia, we're in Virginia in the far southwest corner that borders Tennessee, North Carolina, West Virginia, and Kentucky. It's the Appalachian region, and coal mining is big business down there. That's the main employer, along with farming. It has always had a prescription pill problem for decades, way before even the Purdue Pharma case, way before they became, something that was spread across the country. Because a lot of people get injured on the job, and they go to the doctor, and they've been getting pain pills for years, and the public benefits programs make it very cheap to get pain pills. So instead of abusing the street drugs like cocaine and others that are abused in the more urban areas, pills have always been a problem down there. One of the things that our office decided to do was a little 3-man office. And so we decided to look at doctors that were overprescribing pain pills. So we started doing that in the late 1990s, around 97, 98, 99. And we prosecuted several doctors for overprescribing. What we saw in those prosecutions was a trend moving away from the Lortabs and the Percocets to OxyContin. It looked like what we saw was that OxyContin had become the drug of choice, was being widely prescribed, and was the drug that was being requested by individuals who were doctor shopping and trying to find, go to pill mills. What we also were seeing at the same time was a huge increase in property crimes occurring in our communities down in that area. And the local law enforcement officers, the local sheriffs, were telling us that those property crimes were being fueled by people trying to get money to buy OxyContin. The third thing we saw we heard about were pharmacists complaining about Purdue sales representatives being very aggressive. And, you think about a pharmacist in a small town who knows everybody, and somebody walks in with a prescription for OxyContin, they kind of know what's going on. They know who has a legitimate need for that. And so they were sometimes reluctant to fill those prescriptions, and they were getting pressured by Purdue Pharma sales reps. And we heard complaints about that. So we took those three those three facts, and we had a discussion. Randy Ramsire, who's also depicted in the miniseries, and I had a discussion one day. I kind of remember this. I don't remember a lot because it's been years ago, but I remember this. We're just sitting around the office after work one day and talking about these things. And, one of us said, I think I said, or we discussed, hey, maybe we ought to open a case on Purdue, because in law enforcement, you want to go to the highest level of supply, and something didn't feel right about what was going on with OxyContin. So we opened a case, I think in probably about middle of 2001, right when there was a transition of U.S. attorneys. We were allowed to open a case, and based on those reasons, and it was one of those things where, we didn't know what we were going to find, but my feeling was, we have an obligation to our community, which looks like it's getting devastated by OxyContin. We have an obligation to look and see what's going on. So that's how that got started.
First of all, it's interesting when you talk about the fact that even pre-OxyContin, that there was an issue with pain pills. I don't fault the people who were abusing the pain pills, because we've had on the podcast several times professional athletes, and they say, painkillers are a part of the job description. And, because you can't sit out every game on the bench because you're in pain. You have to get up and you have to play. And it's the same thing with the miners and the farmers. They cannot not go to work because they're in pain. So they have to handle that. And which is obviously what Purdue banked on when they started doing what they did with OxyContin. But I guess I just wanted to make that editorial comment that it's those are professions that fall victim to this type of thing because of the nature of the profession. Because it's physical, because it causes problems, because, mining can cause lung issues, and that causes pain. So anyway, that was just kind of an editorial comment.
I agree with that 100%. The thing to remember also is, if a miner gets injured and they have pain and they don't go to work, they don't get paid.
Right.
So it's a matter of putting food on the table, really, to figure out a way to push through that pain, take a painkiller, and get to work. Because if you're not at work, you don't clock in, you don't get a paycheck.
Right.
And so I 100% agree with your comment. Yep.
And I just wanted to make that comment because I don't want people out there thinking, oh yeah, they're just ignorant workers. No. That's not the situation there. So, okay. So you've got three pretty heavy duty indicators that there could be something going on. And then you have to take that to your boss, and your boss goes, okay, you can open up a case.
Yeah. So interesting that we were in the transition period. And so the outgoing U.S. attorney wanted us to wait till he had left. The interim U.S. attorney, she was the first assistant, so she was there for several months before John Brownlee was finally confirmed. She allowed us to open the case then. And then when John Brownlee came in, we had the conversation with him, and he was very much interested in us moving forward on it. And so basically green lighted it. And of course, in that kind of a case, having worked in DC previously, I knew that we needed the U.S. attorney to be all in and to back us, because that case was going to get scrutinized at many different levels.
Right. Exactly. Because Purdue has a lot of money and the Sackers have a lot of money. And that
And
money can get channeled into areas that can put the kibosh on such an investigation. So, okay,
yes.
so now you've got the green light. Take us a little bit from there. How did you guys then proceed, and who did you talk to? And
Yeah. So one of the first thing was, hey, we needed to get staffing. We needed to have investigators and agents on the case because unlike most, I would say nearly all cases that a U.S. attorney's office does are generated by an investigative agency. One of the what they call the alphabet soup: ATF, FBI, DEA, all those This case was originated by the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is very, very unusual. So we had to go out and look for folks to staff the case. And, one interesting thing is, of course, we went first to the FBI. They had a very small satellite office in Bristol, about 15 miles from Abingdon. Bristol is right on the border with Tennessee. In fact, half of Bristol is in Virginia and half of Bristol is in Tennessee. And they ran it up their chain of command. And this was after 9/11. So what they told us was, we don't have the resources to investigate this kind of a case because we are all in on anti-terrorism. Okay. The other thing in hindsight was,
that's right. Sorry to interrupt you, but you said you
Yes.
started this in like mid 2001. Yeah.
So when John Brownlee took office, like almost 2 days before 9/11.
Oh my goodness.
And so we're in the midst of that. In addition, so there was a lot of things going on that kind of delayed the start of the case, because obviously there was a lot of work being done with respect to anti-terrorism at that time. The FBI was busy, okay, but I also think that there was a political aspect going on, because what I recall is that there was a discussion about, well, Purdue's actually working with federal agencies on, the drug diversion problem, and we're not sure whether there's anything there for FBI. So FBI's out. Okay, DEA, we contacted them. That's the next logical agency, and so they were willing to send a couple of investigators down from DC, 360 miles from us, by the way, to maybe every once in a while to help us serve subpoenas or something like that. Completely inadequate. At the time, didn't know why. It was like, what's going on with that? That's almost worthless. But now, upon reading more facts and talking to different people and watching the Hulu series, there obviously was some internal political things going on at DEA. All right. So I reached out to the Virginia Attorney General's office, which had a fairly new but small Medicaid fraud control unit. Okay. And I also I started making calls to FDA. Based on relationships that had been built with the Medicaid fraud control unit, or the head of the Medicaid fraud control unit, Randy Klaus, he had previously worked for the bingo, or the Virginia Gaming Commission. So he investigated bingo, unlawful bingo games, right? And so this is, I kind of tease him about this. I had been the prosecutor on a case that he had brought along with the IRS to our office for unlawful bingo. Basically, would turn out to be like a mail fraud case. So he's a guy, he's 6'4", and he's just this huge guy. He's like 350 pounds. But he was driving from Richmond down to Bristol. That's a 5-hour drive. Okay. And he was going undercover into these bingo halls. And, you picture back then, there was a lot of smoking going on, and it was a lot of, no offense, because I'm an old guy too, but little old ladies playing bingo. And here in walks this 6'4", 350-pound guy to play bingo with him. Okay. And I always try to picture that and just say, wow, how did he do that? But he had gotten promoted to be the head of the Medicaid fraud control unit. So I called him up and said, hey, we got this case. Can you help us staff it? And he immediately jumped on it and gave us 2 full-time agents.
Wow. Continue.
Okay. So we get this, okay, we got a couple of agents, and they're going to work on it full time, which the feds never do. And this is the kind of case that needs to be worked on full time, because it's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of documents, a lot of witnesses, and you can't do a case like that part time. So we got that. Meanwhile, I'm making calls to the FDA and trying to just understand, because I don't know anything about these kind of cases. And I'm calling the FDA and saying, hey, I need to learn. Can you tell me about how this process works? How do drugs get approved? I'm going to FDA 101, prescription drug, 101, kind of on my own. And as I'm making those calls, that generates a ripple, and the FDA has an Office of Criminal Investigation. They hear that we're trying to do something with OxyContin. They contact us and say, hey, we hear you're trying to do some case that involves an FDA matter, and we want to participate. And so, but they give us 2 agents part-time, because they're in DC, 360 miles from Abingdon, minimum 6-hour drive.
Yep.
But so we have FDA on board, and then IRS has a local agent. They give us one of their agents to help us with the financial pieces. So that was kind of the core investigative group at the very beginning. We got FDA to hire us a contractor to do the document, to focus only on documents and do the document management. And then we went on from there.
Wow. So you had to put together a team, and
Yes.
And obviously, yeah. And so the feds weren't necessarily going to get involved in it, but you have a team now. Okay, keep going.
Yes, and I have a team, but I don't know anything about how to do prescription drugs and what that's all about. So lots of reading, lots of phone calling, and you have to know all that stuff in order to know what kind of documents to ask for.
And what questions to ask. Yeah.
Right. And so that was a process that probably took several months. I'm pretty sure we made multiple trips to the FDA headquarters to talk to people. I remember being in their, back then it was called the Division of Drug Marketing. The folks there, the office there that reviewed the promotional materials, they had like a little basement office a big basement office full of documents and very few people, that opened off into a loading dock, if I remember correctly. And just talking to different people in different sections of the FDA to learn how the process worked, how drugs got approved, how labels got approved, what kind of oversight did FDA do with marketing and promotional materials, learning all that kind of stuff. And that probably took several months. And I think we ended up being in a position to issue a subpoena to the company, the first subpoena to the company, probably a good year. It took a good year to get to that position, December of 2002, if I recall correctly.
And when you were looking at the FDA, I know that there was an issue with the fellow who approved a label which was somewhat less than, what can we say, adequately cautionary?
I think you're being very, very generous. Okay. So the first thing I learned was, well, read the label, because that tells everybody what the company's allowed to say about the drug. And when you go to the label, what popped out, what jumps out at you is delayed absorption as provided by OxyContin tablets is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug. Now, I didn't know anything about drugs at all, but when I read that, I knew that that was nonsense. That was completely ridiculous, and raised a question about, well, how in the world did that language get into this label? Because it was being used by their sales reps to say, hey, even the FDA agrees with us that OxyContin is less addictive, less abusable, et cetera. There's words there, but when you read them and you think about them, they mean absolutely nothing, and all they are is a marketing tool. So that told me at least two things. Number one, there's a case here. There's something going on here. And number two, there's something fishy about how this drug got approved. So that guy's name is Curtis Wright. I want to say this. It's public record. It's in various publications. It's in the Hulu series. He was an FDA medical officer who reviewed OxyContin's data to make the determination of whether it was safe and effective. And he also was the medical officer who approved the labeling. Okay. And he's also the medical officer who, after the approval of OxyContin and this label with this very, I think, dangerous language in it, he went to work for Purdue. He made a stop to make it look good for about maybe a year and a half with another company. But to me, the goal was always to end up at Purdue, where he made $400,000, probably four times or so what he was making at FDA. Now, and I told this to Patrick Radin Keefe in his book, Empire of Pain. I told him that I thought there was some deal cut between Curtis Wright and Purdue to get the drug approved and to get that favorable wording into the label. But I could never prove that there was the quid pro quo, and there's nothing illegal and nothing that violates a regulation for a person who works for FDA to review a company's drug and then turn around and go to work for the company. And believe me,
unethical at best, probably,
yes.
But conflict of interest, but illegal, I guess not. Okay.
Yes, and I spent a lot of time looking, because I said, this is corrupt. It is corrupt with a little c, but it's not corrupt in terms of being able to prosecute somebody.
Understood. Okay. Oh, just by the way, as a side note, is a picture of that label at all available anywhere? Because I would pop it into this interview and show that wording. Just curious.
I've never tried to look for it. I wouldn't be surprised if you could find it on the internet somewhere.
Okay.
Because I had basically memorized that wording.
I see that.
I didn't need to look for it.
I see
because
that.
It was such a to me, it was just such a obvious, blatant piece of wrongdoing.
Yeah, fraud. Total fraud.
Yeah. And so that was something that whenever we interviewed a lot of people, and one of my questions would be, who came up with this language? So I ended up committing it to memory because I asked questions about it so often.
And was it Curtis Wright that came up with the wording, or was it Purdue that came up with the wording?
Well, that's the question. I think that there have been reports, and I think what we found out was that, and I remember this now. Yes, a lot of things come back after 14 or 15 years. Curtis Wright met with the Purdue team that was going through and trying to get FDA to approve OxyContin. And he met with them, I believe, on more than one occasion, and met with them, as I recall, at a hotel off site from FDA. kind of, on their own. Again, nothing per se illegal. And I believe that the Purdue staff wrote his medical officer reviews. Okay. Now, at the time I was thinking, well, I've worked with and I've looked at a lot of government bureaucrats, and I could see someone who doesn't want, it's a bureaucrat 9 to 5, taking what the company wrote, looking at it and using it.
Just tell me what you want to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll look at it. And there was some language in those reviews that made it clear that OxyContin was not better than immediate release. Okay. Drugs was not better than the Percocets and the Lortabs. It was equal to, and that its adverse event, that's a technical term that FDA uses, but basically it would relate to, people suffering from symptoms of addiction or withdrawal or that kind of thing. Adverse events were not any better than your immediate release, your other opioids. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that, even if Purdue wrote that, it seemed to be straight up. Now, I don't know what Curtis Wright's involvement was in that delayed absorption language, because that's completely the opposite. That language is completely the opposite of what he signed off on those safety and efficacy reviews. But I suspect that Purdue had a big hand in writing that language, and that even if he didn't write it, Curtis Wright approved it in the label. And there was a back and forth between him and one of his staffers, a staffer who questioned that language and said, is this just marketing BS? Isn't this just marketing BS? And his response, which is, I think, documented in a number of places, was, no, it's literally true. Well, okay, it's a literally true statement, but it's nonsensical and shouldn't be in a label for a dangerous drug.
Wow. Purdue really had their ducks in a row, didn't they?
Well, and if anybody wants to see how the Sackler family worked, and Purdue is sort of an extension of the Sackler family, and I know we're going to get into discussing the Sackler family, Patrick Keefe's book, Empire of Pain, gives great insight into that, because the playbook that was used to market OxyContin was the same playbook used by Richard Sackler's father and uncles.
Arthur, right?
Yeah, Arthur, Raymond, and Mortimer, to market the antipsychotics.
And Valium.
And Valium. And also they were involved in the marketing of the first generation of antibiotics in the same way. Okay, in a very similar way. They had established that playbook. They made Valium sort of a everyday drug for everybody, right?
Mother's little helper, the little
Exactly.
blue pill. Yeah, for the stressed out mom. Yep.
And what they did was they co-opted an FDA official, okay, to help them get that drug through, and they created bogus marketing materials based on studies and based on testimonials from non-existent people, almost in the same. And that playbook was followed by Richard Sackler and the Sackler family for the marketing of OxyContin, only OxyContin being a much more dangerous drug.
Yep. Okay. So you found Curtis Wright, and you found the wording on the label. And where did that lead you?
Yes. Reconstructing from 15, 16, 17 years ago. That's a tall task.
I understand.
So that led in many directions. One of the things that I wanted to look at was how the drug was being promoted. So I started looking at promotional materials. One of the things I do have a distinct memory of was the video they did called "I Got My Life Back." Again, the part of the playbook is to use testimonials of to sell the drug, to say, hey, look at these testimonials from these people that are using the drug who are telling people how great it is, how they prior to taking OxyContin, their lives were miserable. They didn't really have lives because of the pain. And after taking OxyContin, they were now able to do all the things that they used to do before they had the pain problem. So I remember watching that video, and I was watching it at home, just sort of as it was depicted in the Hulu series. I didn't have a basement. That's a little bit different, but I had, I was at home in like a little sunroom that we had watching it. And I remember watching it, a couple of times and saying, I don't see anything here, but something doesn't feel right. So I probably watched it 5 or 6 times until I noticed that, this is a promotional piece about OxyContin, but none of the participants are saying OxyContin. They're saying the pain pills, the medicine, that kind of thing. And I said, so, and I verified that this was used as an OxyContin marketing piece because it had it would show a picture of, it would show one of those, I think it was 6 individuals speaking, and it'd have a dosage for OxyContin superimposed underneath them. And at the end, there was sort of the disclaimer language that they have to put into those kind of marketing pieces about OxyContin. So I said, well, I wonder if they really are taking OxyContin. And for the most part, they were, except for one guy. His name was Johnny. He was kind of the star of the show. He was sort of the Southern gentleman who was the construction worker. They depicted him driving a backhoe after supposedly he was on OxyContin and was able to get back out and work. They showed him he was raising, bloodhounds or dogs, hunting dogs, and they showed him feeding his hunting dogs. And that was the kind of video that would really resonate down in, Appalachia. Mm-hmm. And Johnny, as it turns out, we went and saw the physician that's in that, Dr. Spanos, and talked to him. Started on OxyContin, but he had to quit because it was too expensive, and he really wasn't taking OxyContin, notwithstanding what the video was promoting. So that was that. We did a lot of work on that piece and went to the advertising agency they used to make it up in New York and tried to run down, hey, who in Purdue actually did this and knew that they were using at least one person who wasn't on OxyContin. I looked at a lot of the actual handouts they were taking to doctors' offices and looking for what they were representing in there. And so the other thing they represented that was completely bogus was the blood level charts. And so they were trying to say that the different, even though the FDA's review said there's no real qualitative difference between OxyContin and other opioids, except for OxyContin, you only have to take it twice a day instead of 4 times a day. For the others, the Percocets, the Lortabs, all that, they were promoting it as, well, the blood levels are different. From OxyContin, you get this smooth, continuous blood level of oxycodone for 12 hours.
Timed release.
Because it's time release, because of this time release system. But as compared to the immediate release drugs, you get these spikes, you get these peaks and valleys. So the spikes, euphoria, and the valleys are withdrawal. Therefore, you got euphoria. That means people are going to want to go and take more of it and going to get addicted to it and they want to abuse it. And if you have the valleys, you have withdrawal, and now you got people that are looking for the drug to stave off withdrawal. Well, guess what? OxyContin doesn't do that, was their pitch. Mm-hmm. And so they had these blood level charts they were using that sort of tried to make that case. But when you actually looked at the data, there was almost no difference between the 2 blood levels.
Okay.
So
did they just stretch it out or condense it or?
Yeah, they made a chart. They made a chart where, and it's shown on the Hulu miniseries.
Yeah, I remember.
Yes, they made a blood level chart that is logarithmic. Okay, it's not. So you go from 0 to 5 to 10, then it goes to 20 to 80, and so you have a chart where the high numbers are at the very top are compressed. And
Yep.
so now if you put it in, so you've manipulated the chart to make your curve a lot smoother.
You just change the scale.
It's changed the scale, and you go to the doctor's office, you say, hey, look, your other drugs, and they would draw what we used to call shark fins. Your other drugs have the shark fin effect of blood levels. And so your patients that you're giving Lortabs or Percocets to are getting high, and they're going through withdrawal every 4 hours. If you give them Oxycontin, we have this smooth, continuous flow, and they don't have those peaks and valleys where they're getting high or going through withdrawal. And that was all a big lie.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
A huge lie to convince doctors to prescribe Oxycontin. If they were, and the pitch was, hey, if you're concerned about abusers, prescribe Oxycontin. It'll weed them out because they don't get high on it. And a complete lie. And again, in our part of the country, doctors were concerned about drug seekers. And so they were switching folks from those other opioids to Oxycontin in droves.
Yep.
So there was that marketing piece and several other. So we started digging into the documents and the marketing pieces. We were going out and interviewing folks to find out what they were told, former employees, former sales reps, to find out what they were told to say, how they were trained. We started getting the call notes where sales reps were reporting back to headquarters what they were seeing and what they were being told about abuse and addiction to Oxycontin. So we were gathering all that information, probably for a fairly long period of time.
Okay. And so then you gather all that information, then you have to take it to your boss when you have enough that you think you can prosecute.
Yeah. So in the meantime, we're giving him regular updates. I'm giving the supervisors for the agents that have been provided to us quarterly updates of, hey, here's what we're found. Here's where we're going to go next. We're out. The team is out. We're all out doing cold call interviews, basically, for the most part. Kind of my theory was that, if people know you're coming, they're going to be very cautious. They're going to be worried about, what their former employer, Purdue Pharma, is going to say. They're going to maybe spin stuff. They're going to be worried about what their role is. So we would do cold call interviews, and those would last maybe 15 to 45 minutes, but you get sort of the first impression from them in those interviews. So we put the case together, regular updates to the boss.
Hey, Rick,
Yes.
how many interviews would you say you did? Just curious if you had to ballpark it.
So I think for the team, we probably did 250 interviews.
Okay.
You know, I probably did 50 or more that I went on. You know, what had happened was that we issued we opened the case in 2001. We issued the first subpoena in 2002, the first request for records in 2002. We were gathering records, reviewing records through about 2004, maybe started interviewing people. But I realized, and at the time, you know, Randy and I were both doing other cases. And I realized at the time, sometime around the end of 2004, that if we're going to make this case work, one of us has to do it full time. You can't kind of do it piecemeal and spend one day working on Purdue, go work on a gun or a drug case for a day and try to come back and figure out what did I do last time and where do I need to go next on Purdue. So we decided that I would, you know, get rid of all my other cases. And in January 2005, I remember this was too cold, I basically moved out of our little office in the strip mall in Abingdon, the U.S. Attorney's office, where the U.S. Attorney's office was, and moved into the offsite location where we had most of our records, and basically vacated my office for almost 2 years just to work on Purdue. Yeah.
Wow.
So
are we up to the chicken story yet or not yet?
Yeah. I think the chicken story, gosh, that came on fairly early on. It would have been after we'd issued the request for records to Purdue, so they knew that they were under investigation. Probably
For those who haven't watched Dopesick, you have to tell the chicken story.
Right. So we'd issued our subpoena. We were doing a lot of back and forth with the lawyers for Purdue about producing records and the large volume and which ones did we want first, and you know, what else do we need? And we, you know, probably had issued multiple subpoenas. They probably knew we were out interviewing folks, doing cold calls, and out of the blue, somebody from the Deputy Attorney General's office, who at the time was James Comey, called John Brownlee, the U.S. Attorney. And just so for folks that don't know this, the U.S. attorneys are all directly supervised by the Deputy Attorney General. So John Brownlee's supervisor was summoning him to the main justice in D.C. because he had concerns, I think it was concerns about our investigation of Purdue Pharma. Okay. And so I know John Brownlee and I went. I think Randy was may have been undergoing his cancer treatments then and couldn't go. John Brownlee and I went to D.C. We go into the main justice building at 10th and Constitution to meet with the Deputy Attorney General, John Brownlee's boss, James Comey. We go into the conference room, and the first thing that Mr. Comey says is, "Tell me why you guys are investigating the chicken guy." And John and I look at each other and said, "Chicken guy? Yeah, why are you investigating Purdue Farms?" And I said, "Well, oh, no. We're not investigating the chicken guy. We're not investigating Purdue Farms. We're investigating Purdue Pharma, and it's a pharmaceutical company, and it's spelled with a U and not an E." So that conversation occurred. Now it's very much dramatized.
Yes.
In the Hulu series.
Yes.
But there was a question. There was some confusion there at the beginning.
Okay.
And the discussion was whether or not Purdue Pharma, not the chicken guy, but the pharmaceutical company, was a publicly traded company or not. Because back in those days, the department was just coming out of the Enron Arthur Andersen debacle, had issued new guidelines about the prosecution of publicly traded corporations.
Okay. And
there was a lot of scrutiny of that. And so when we informed Deputy Attorney General Comey that Purdue Pharma was a family-owned business and not a publicly traded company, he said, okay, that's fine. You guys go do your investigation and make your case.
Awesome. Awesome. It's a funny story, but thank you for adding that in. So now I took you totally off the track. So 2004, you are now full-time on this investigation.
Yeah, probably just at the end of 2004 in December, like, right after the new year, maybe January, I go move full-time into the investigation, dig into all the documents. We start interviewing witnesses. My goal is to get to some place where we're near completion of the investigation as quickly as we can. A lot of back and forth with the company attorneys about document productions and what's there, what's not. A massive privilege log where they've withheld documents or pieces of documents based on the potential for attorney-client privilege or attorney work product. And so a lot of dealings with that, a lot of interviews taking place, so a lot of travel around the country. And then that takes us into 2006. And now we're, reaching a place where the case is kind of getting formed in my mind. Okay. And so I start writing the prosecution memo, the famous or infamous prosecution memo, which I have not seen probably in 12 or more years, but a lot of other people seem to have seen it. And yeah, I think it's been reported to be about 120 pages, which sounds about right. And so that is something that took me a long time to write. When I do and I'm going to speak generically because the prosecution memorandum I know has grand jury material in it. But generally, when I write a prosecution memorandum, especially for a complex case that's going to get a lot of scrutiny, I want to have every fact that I refer to in that prosecution memo, I want to be able to tie it to a piece of evidence, whether it's a document or an interview. And so the way I wrote prosecution memos and the way I would still do that if I were still writing them is to state a fact. Purdue, for example, Purdue Pharma promoted OxyContin as less addictive and less abusable. And then I would have like a footnote that would refer to whatever documents or whatever evidence I had to support that fact. Now, as you can imagine, a 120-page pros memo, that would be a very laborious and lengthy task. And the other thing I wanted to do was have a notebook. Now it would be digital, a folder on my computer, but back then we were still using notebooks that would have every document referred to in that prosecution memo available to be reviewed. So that took several weeks to put that together. At the same time, we're trying to wrap up the investigation.
But how smart to do it that way, and to make sure that, and I know you know to do this, but to make sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, because obviously Purdue has billions of dollars and many, many lawyers, high-powered lawyers, including Rudy Giuliani, and you know that they're going to be able to come after. And so you have to do that. You have to take that kind of time. You have to do that.
Yes. And so, Joni, I knew, having worked in D.C. at Main Justice for almost 9 years, and having seen some of the political goings on, and knowing that defendants or potential defendants in criminal cases who can afford to hire expensive and connected lawyers, that they hire people who can pick up the phone and call the Attorney General, who go and have lunch with the Deputy Attorney General. Knowing that and anticipating that would happen in a case like Purdue Pharma, what I was thinking when I was writing that process memo was, I needed to write this so in a way that they don't have an excuse to throw our case out the window. Okay, so that means I've got to, as you said, figuratively cross every T and dot every I, and show that we've investigated every angle and every potential defense in this case.
And when you state a fact, here's where that fact came from.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that was my, kind of understanding and my objective in writing that process memo. My thinking was, hey, if I leave something uninvestigated, or if I leave a hole in this case, they're going to have a real easy excuse to toss it. And I want to make it as hard as I possibly can for somebody who's that's in the political realm to listen to a Purdue lawyer and say, you're right, I found a loophole here, I'm tossing the case.
Wow. So it took you several weeks to write that. So then what happened after you finished it? Where did it go, and what was the response?
So for me, and I had the rest of the team, of course, Randy, and we had two lawyers from the Department of Justice's Consumer Protection Branch, is what it's known as now. Basically, the people that do the office in the Department of Justice that oversees cases involving the FDA. I would have had the team review it. I would have then sent it to my boss. He then would have reviewed and approved it, and then it would have gone up. And I can't remember whether he sent it up or we would have sent it up to the main Department of Justice's criminal division in the fraud section. Okay. They would have then reviewed it, and this kind of case, given the amount of money involved, the issue involved, the publicity that it would generate, they would have staffed it through their chain of command up to the Deputy Attorney General's office. At the same time, Purdue's lawyers, they knew what we were doing. We kind of engaged them, and had engaged them to talk about kind of, normally what we did in those kind of cases where we were dealing with other lawyers was to make a presentation. Hey, we've done our case. Here's what we found. If you want to talk about a way to resolve this before we go to court, now's the time. So we had afforded them that opportunity. And of course, what they did was they went back to the Department of Justice, to the Deputy Attorney General's office. And the Deputy Attorney General at that time was McNulty. Comey had left, and McNulty had delegated the case down to the Assistant Attorney General for Criminal, Alice Fisher. So she was sort of hands-on person. She was not the decision maker, okay, but she was the person that was delegated to, okay, hear what the prosecutors have to say, hear what the defense attorneys have to say, and come up with a recommendation to go to the Deputy Attorney General. All right, so I guess the next important event was we get word, hey, Assistant Attorney General Fisher is meeting with the defense attorneys. And she's given them a couple of hours on this particular day in 2006. Okay. And let me back up, because, the Hulu series, let me back up a little bit here. Okay. So before the dealings at Department of Justice, we were engaging with the Purdue attorneys. We made our presentation. They called us to their offices in D.C. to make their presentation, and this is normal process. They made a presentation. What their pitch was: here's why you shouldn't be prosecuting Purdue or any of its executives.
Look at all these poor people that need OxyContin, Mr. Mountcastle.
Part of it, yes, it's a very good drug. If you prosecute Purdue, you're going to deprive all of these people who really need this medication. You're going to deprive them of their ability to get it. That's part of the pitch, along with a lot of legal arguments, a lot of, some of which bear mentioning. They had a couple of their main arguments were, this was a 2-day presentation, PowerPoint presentation they gave John Brownlee, me, and Randy in D.C. The FDA chief counsel was there, and the team from the Department of Justice was there. 2-day presentation. The two main points were, in addition to the, hey, this is a good drug and you're going to deprive people who really need it of their ability to get it, was, if in fact there was false statements and fraud being done in the marketing of OxyContin, it was done by a few rogue employees. So you had the rogue employee defense, and you had the other defense was what they called the learned intermediary defense. The learned intermediaries in this case were your prescribing doctors. Prescribing doctors, they can prescribe stuff on their own. They use their independent judgment. They're smarter than a Purdue sales rep. They wouldn't prescribe OxyContin just because a Purdue sales rep told them to. They would be prescribing it because they thought there was a merit to it. So we had to listen to that for 2 days. So here's the interesting part of that is that, so we were there for 2 days. We spent the night in D.C. At the end of the second day, at the end of their presentation, John Brownlee said, hey, I want to gather my team together and talk to them. Can you give us a room? They gave us a room. John gathers us around and says, does this change anything? The whole team says, no, it doesn't change anything. So he walked back in after we met for about 2.5 minutes and said, hey, thank you for your presentation. It was very well done. This doesn't change anything. We're going forward. And you could kind of see the shock on the faces of the lawyers. Like, you mean after this 2 days, all we've done, you guys do a 2-minute deliberation and you tell us it doesn't mean anything.
Excuse me, but we know bullshit when we see it.
Yeah. And so that was a fun point of that discussion. Yes. Okay. So then we move into the Department of Justice meetings.
Okay. And Ms. Fisher.
Yes. And of course, unlike most of those meetings that happen in other cases where the decision maker or the person that's been delegated to gather information, as Ms. Fisher was, would meet with the prosecutors first, okay, and then meet with, so we could kind of brief her up on the case and what we found, and here's what our investigation found. Then she could meet with the defense attorneys and hear sort of what their response was to all that. She met with them first, okay, for at least 2 hours. Then we got, I think it was 30 minutes maybe with her. We made our presentation. We left after our, maybe we stretched it out into 45 minutes, maybe an hour, but certainly less than what she gave the defense attorneys. And John Brownlee meets with her and he comes out and he's very much upset and very much concerned that she's not going to let us go forward. And so, that's where the political things start to happen. The company was willing to the Sackler family was willing to sacrifice the company. Okay. And they were willing to sacrifice the 3 executives up to a point. Okay. we felt like we had enough evidence to prosecute the 3 executives for felonies. And just to kind of put that in perspective, our goal all along in the investigation was to determine who the highest culpable individual in that company was for the wrongdoing, based on where the evidence led us to and based on the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. So we had gotten to CEO Michael Friedman, General Counsel and Executive Vice President Howard Udell, and Medical Director and Executive Vice President Paul Goldenheim. We had gotten to that level using that standard. What we anticipated was that if we went forward against them with felonies, that one and possibly more than one would decide that they were looking at some serious prison time and they would need to try to cut a deal. And that deal would involve them cooperating to the next level, which would be the Sackler family level, right? Probably Richard Sackler, who was immediately preceded Michael Friedman as the president and appeared to be the shot caller. Probably Richard Sackler, but we needed that cooperation at that CEO, general counsel level to get to the next level. What happened was that the department would not let us do the felony prosecutions. They succumbed to that political pressure. And so here's an interesting part of the story. After the meeting at Department of Justice, where John Brownlee, in essence, was told, we're not going to let you prosecute those individuals for felonies. And I think he was concerned that they weren't going to let us prosecute them at all. We went into meetings, settlement meetings with the Purdue lawyers. And one of the things that came out of those settlement meetings was whether or not, okay, so the company, Purdue Frederick or whatever the company name is, boom, they're going to sacrifice that. There's a felony for you guys, for you feds. Take it, you ought to take that and declare victory. We'll write a big check, et cetera, et cetera. We were still wanting to hold individuals responsible. And so the discussion was, well, we've got this misdemeanor. And we went back and forth with their attorneys about whether or not they would even plead guilty to a misdemeanor. And I remember one of the defense attorneys, and this was in the evening. We've been meeting for almost all day and into the evening. Said, "Hey, we got all these smart lawyers around us. Can't we come up with something that doesn't involve a criminal conviction?" Okay, because these guys, they're pillars of the community, blah, they've no prior record, all this stuff that you hear about those kind of guys. So we huddled up together and we said, if the department's not going to even let us prosecute them, maybe we need to have a fallback position. And our fallback position was, you know what? We can agree to some sort of a resolution that involves a disgorgement where they, pay over all the money they made from their jobs as running the OxyContin, running Purdue Pharma during OxyContin, during this criminal wrongdoing. And they can agree to lifetime bans from the industry. So that was teed up on the table for them and it was, so you guys decide what you want, either misdemeanors or this non-criminal resolution with a lifetime ban from the industry. So at that time, our thinking was this, okay? The department wasn't going to support us. The department was probably not going to let us prosecute these individuals for anything. What can we do to keep them from walking away scot-free and continuing to go about their merry way and do their business? Well, we can have this non-criminal resolution where they get banned from the industry. That's at least something. That's at least some benefit. So that was teed up for them. And again, kind of getting long-winded, probably getting a little boring, but I remember being at home and Randy calling me on the phone. This was in the evening, a couple of days later, a day or two later. And Randy calls me on the phone and, Randy sometimes joked about things. And he said, sometimes in a very dry way. And he says to me, well, they've decided they're going to take the criminal charge. I said, yeah, Randy, right. You're joking. He said, no, I'm really serious this time. So, at the time it was, okay, that's great. We'll take that. We're tagging 3 executives for crimes. That's not been done in the pharmaceutical industry before. It's a starting point. It's, we use these misdemeanors. It's maybe there's some deterrence factor to it. Other executives are going to see, hey, the government's going to come after you. You could get a criminal conviction of some sort. There's risk involved. Maybe that will change behavior in the rest of the pharmaceutical industry. Turns out it didn't, but so looking back though, it was like, now I'm thinking 12, 13 years later and reading a lot more information and watching, stuff on the documentaries that have been done, the Hulu miniseries that was done. There was some reason that the Sacklers told those 3 guys, take the criminal misdemeanor, not the other. Okay. I'm convinced now, again, my personal opinion is that the Sacklers were making the decisions on what those 3 guys did. And they felt that the best way to protect the family was if they took those criminal misdemeanor charges.
Wow. Yeah. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
It turns out they got banned from the pharmaceutical business for 12 years anyway.
But that doesn't hurt the Sacklers. That only hurts them.
No, it doesn't. But again, our view was that the Purdue case was just one in a long line of pharmaceutical cases where the department went after pharmaceutical companies, secured convictions of some sort, either a misdemeanor or a felony against a company, had the company write a big check, and then let's do it all again. And our thinking was the only way you change corporate behavior is if you go and prosecute the decision makers, the corporate decision makers, because corporations don't do things by themselves. They have people making decisions who are approving conduct, giving orders to commit certain violations, and establishing strategies that result in criminal violations. And the only way you change that behavior all across the whole industry is to hold those corporate executives responsible one way or another, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor conviction, and you do that as a matter of course. And everybody knows that that's going to happen. And now, instead of, what I would like to see is that CEOs, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, instead of getting their daily profit and loss statements and what's the stock price doing, and that's all I want to know about, that they also get the report that says, how are we doing with complying with the FDA rules and regulations and our obligation to the people that are using our drugs? And there's no incentive to do that.
Yep. I have to say, I just have to say that, first of all, you are a hero in my book. You and Randy and your staff for pursuing this. Might have been a lot easier on you to give up on it, but you guys didn't. And I think that there are a lot of people in this country and beyond who owe you a huge debt of gratitude for pursuing this area. I also want to say that, and it's not that it's just your job, but a lot of people can't confront the type of evil that is the Sackler family and some of the Purdue execs, and the fact that people would market the way they did, not really caring about how it affected the man on the street, the guy taking the drug. And I think that I thank you for pursuing this. And I'm I'm glad that you're telling the story because I want to continue to shed light on this. The miniseries did a great job, and it's dramatized and it's really good. But I like hearing everything from your perspective, and you're a hero, Rick.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. And, you know, I was just doing my job at the time. And
yeah, but
but
let me just say something. Yeah, you may have just been doing your job, but Curtis Wright was doing his job. Okay? It's a little bit different, Rick.
Yeah, Curtis Wright was doing his job, but looking out for himself. He was using his job for his own self-interest, and there is a huge difference there. I agree with you.
Yes.
I just felt a responsibility, to the community. I felt a responsibility to the victims of who had gotten addicted because of these lies that were told. And, I wish I could have done more. I wish that we had been able to prosecute those executives for felonies because they deserved it. I wish that one of them would have rolled over on one of the Sacklers because that's where the culpability appears to have really been. And I wish that the department had decided that we do need to go after individuals. I mean, there was a lot of lip service. There were a lot of memos issued about that, but very little action. And it just, it's really disheartening, I guess. It's really disappointing, let me put it this way, that after 2007, we had this little blip for about 5 minutes of national news about this case, but then nothing. And we're now and it segued into the second phase of this horrendous opioid crisis. That is really what is disappointing, that we are where we are now with opioid addiction.
I completely understand. I wish everything you wish, but you have to know that had you and Randy and Mr. Brownlee, had you not done everything that you did, the light that is being shed on the Sackler families today would not have been shed at all. And as I said this in an earlier podcast, they may win a skirmish or two in the courts, but they are never going to win in the court of public opinion, and they cannot hide. That is one of the good points and sometimes not so good points about the internet, but they cannot hide. They will not win in the court of public opinion. And what you guys did opened that door. And so while, yeah, I wish you could have gone after them as well, I absolutely cannot fault you for anything that you did. And you have to take a huge win on what you got done. You have to.
Yeah, and it's what's done is done, and we did our best under the circumstances and under the limitations that were placed upon us by the decision makers at the Department of Justice. So, that's all been done. What I'm looking at now is, so Purdue now is a 2-time offender, right? And the conduct that's described in the guilty plea in 2020, to me, is worse than the conduct that we convicted him for in 2007. We prosecuted and got some sort of convictions for 3 executives. In this 2020 case, which involves, to me, in my opinion, worse conduct, no individuals have been prosecuted. There's something wrong about that.
Yep. You're absolutely correct. And the other thing that I think what you guys did kind of opens the door to and sheds a light on is the demand that's coming through from a lot of people for the DOJ to do their job.
Right. Yes. And, I support that. I support the victims. To me, those are the real heroes. You have people who have lost a son or a daughter. I mean, I cannot imagine how anything more devastating than that.
I can't either.
To opioid overdoses and you got people families who are basically torn apart trying to deal with a loved one who is addicted to opioids. And from my perspective, those are the real heroes. And I was really glad that Danny Strong's miniseries highlighted the struggle that those folks are going through.
Yep. And we did an interview, I think it was the last interview we did with a filmmaker who made a documentary called Overdosed about OxyContin being poured into West Virginia. And we interviewed 2 former addicts and and they basically are heroes because they've come out the other side and took a lot of flack for speaking out against this whole situation. I applaud you for what you did. I understand if you weren't as responsible as you are, you would be perfectly satisfied with everything you did. The fact that you wish you had done more is just more of a statement on your wanting to take responsibility. And I applaud you. You did a fantastic job. And hopefully with this podcast and with, Dopesick, I'm recommending people look at Overdosed, that there's going to be more and more and more and more light shed on this. And you helped start that. So thank you for talking to us today. And you're a hero. Just take it. Just accept it.
Well, it's my pleasure, Joni, and I appreciate you doing this podcast and shedding a light on issues like this and supporting, again, those addicted to and the families of those addicted to opioids and other substances. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. If you have not watched the series on Hulu called Dopesick, you might want to do that because Rick is in that series. I mean, he and his partner Randy, they were the 2 U.S. attorneys who put this whole case together, and that's what Dopesick is all about. You should watch it. It gives just kind of like just a more visual story behind this whole thing. I know Rick's interview was a little bit long, but I think it's important because I think that, as I said, all of us, if you are addicted to opioids, or somebody who's addicted to opioids, or if you even care that people are dying from opioids, then it is incumbent upon you and me and to not let this story get swept under the carpet and not let the Sacklers hide from the horrific crimes that they're responsible for and the number of overdose deaths that they're responsible for. So thank you so much for listening. We have some even more exciting interviews coming up, and we will talk to you again next week.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.